at democracynow.org. Well, while Republican candidates campaign for a chance to beat President Obama, the president's also facing criticism from progressives. President Obama plans to address Iowa Democrats who caucus tonight through a live satellite feed and share his ideas about the importance of the 2012 election. For months, Obama's re-election campaign has been working with Iowans to train volunteers and keep up interest in the president's agenda. However, the writer and social critic Thomas Frank suggests Obama has so far failed to provide a coherent progressive economic alternative that challenges the unlikely comeback of the right. According to Frank, the American right not only retains legitimacy, but has thrived despite the 2008 economic collapse and ongoing recession. And he's written a new book, Pity the Billionaire, The Hard Times Swindle and the Unlikely Comeback of the Right. Thomas Frank is the author of What's the Matter with Kansas, and then wrote The Wrecking Crew, How Conservatives Rule. He's a regular columnist for Harper's. We welcome you to Democracy Now!, as well as John Nichols, still on with us from Des Moines. And Thomas Frank, as you observe this first caucus, the first test of the 2012 election, your thoughts as you talk about the unlikely comeback of the right. It doesn't look like that in Iowa.
You mean it's because it's likely, or it's such a mess?
Because it seems to be in such crisis.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that. I mean, they just came off a big victory in the 2010 elections. And what I mean by unlikely comeback is when the economy fell apart in 2008, you know, on President Bush's watch, and with all the sort of signature Republican conservative policies that they had put in place over generations, deregulating banks in this way and that, you know, the financial sector do just whatever they wanted. The whole thing, you know, exploded in our faces. And this was very clearly the product, you know, it was their doing. It was the product of their policies. And so when the Republican Party, when it fell apart for them in 2008, it made a lot of sense, you know, to pundits and observers and, you know, people like me in journalism. And everybody started writing about you know, this is the end of the conservative movement. The Republican Party is going to take them, you know, years and years and years to rebuild. And in 2 years, the funny thing is, first of all, they didn't take the pundits' advice. They didn't move to the center. They didn't moderate themselves. They did the opposite. They purged their moderate wing, moved dramatically to the right with the Tea Party movement, and enjoyed this incredible success in the 2010 elections. You know, this amazing comeback. So whether they'll keep rolling on with that in 2012, I mean, that's anyone's guess, of course. But so far, they really are on a roll.
And the significance, though, then, as we roll forward from 2010 to 2012, of the Occupy movement, of the uprising in Wisconsin that John Nichols reported from?
Oh yes, I was there. I saw. I reported on that as well. And that was a very inspiring moment for me. You know, I had in my lifetime, I've never seen 100,000 people, you know, protesting something, you know, what was essentially an abstraction. You know, that the governor of Wisconsin wanted to take away collective bargaining rights. It was an impressive thing, an amazing show of solidarity. And if that kind of momentum continues, you know, hopefully you could see a changed political landscape in the next few years. Now, there is something similar between the Tea Party movement and the Occupy movement, and between the protests in Wisconsin and the Tea Party movement, although people on the right don't want to admit it and people on the left don't like to admit it either. But these are all populist movements, okay? These are movements that are disgusted with elitism in one form or another. And the problem is that with the Democrats is that the official sort of Washington, D.C., you know, White House Democrats, the people who are inside the consensus, as they like to say, don't really understand that. They haven't grasped that you know, that the picture of American politics has changed. It's not about the center versus the extremes. It's not about left versus right. It really is about common interests against, as opposed to, say, special interests.
I want to bring John back into this conversation, John Nichols in Des Moines. While we're talking about the Iowa caucus, let's go back to Wisconsin for a minute. What's happening with the recall of Governor Walker?
Well, I'm glad to be on with my friend Tom, who actually drove around Wisconsin with me during the February and March protests of last year. And that energy has continued in Wisconsin. there is an effort to recall Governor Scott Walker. It is, as Tom suggests, a populist movement using an old tool of the progressives and the populists from a century ago, the recall, forcing a new election. And the recall movement announced weeks ago that it had gathered over 500,000 signatures. So it's well on its way. It's going to certainly achieve the number of signatures needed to recall the governor. There are still 2 more weeks to gather signatures. And so I anticipate that they will get into the range of 700 to 800,000 signatures.
And how many do they need,
to force
John?
a recall of Governor Walker? Oh, I'm sorry. They need 540,000 to force a recall. But you want to have a large cushion on that because the governor will challenge those signatures. I think that there's very little question that they will achieve a much higher number, again, in that 700 to 800,000 range. And significantly, a huge number of those signatures are coming from rural areas, including from counties that were won by Scott Walker. At least one county that voted for Scott Walker for governor, more people have signed recall petitions than voted for Walker in 2010. That really is evidence of sort of a populist fervor, precisely the sort of thing that Tom Frank talks about, where people who maybe did swing to the right, or at least to the Republicans in 2010, at least some of them appear to be swinging very hard against the Republicans as this recall gets going.
And the significance of the Occupy movement in Iowa. I mean, here over the weekend on New Year's Eve, hundreds of people went down to try to retake Zuccotti Park, and scores of people were arrested there through the night over New Year's Eve. In Occupy Iowa, who are the people who are involved? Are they Republicans, Democrats, Independents? Who are they? And they're getting arrested every day.
Sure. Occupy Des Moines, which is sort of the core grouping, but now there's Occupy Cedar Valley and other groupings around the state, has really been it's a remarkable play out of the Occupy Wall Street protest. These are people who picked up very quickly on the energy that you saw in Zuccotti Park and brought it to not just Des Moines, but rural Iowa. And some of it is rooted in a long-term group here, Iowa Citizens for Community Involvement, Iowa CCI, just a terrific organization that's had a lot of energy for a long time, and you've featured them on this show. But also, there's just a tremendous number of young people. I went to the Occupy offices here in Des Moines. They have a large office that they've taken a space, and it was packed with a multi-generational group of folks, a lot of young people, even 14, 15-year-old high school students, all the way up to 70, 80-year-old retired pastors, a lot of people from the faith community, and also people like Ed Fallon, who is a former state representative and one-time candidate for the Democratic nomination for governor of Iowa, who really has embraced this movement, was actually one of the first people arrested in a protest at the state capitol. And so it's a diverse movement here, pulling together a lot of people who weren't involved in politics, as well as some people who've been involved for a long time. And they have many different interventions, not just protests, but also there are some folks who will be going to the caucuses to caucus uncommitted, to send a signal to both the Democratic and the Republican parties that they're unsatisfied with the leadership of President Obama and the Republican contenders on core economic issues.
John Nichols, thanks so much for joining us, as we, of course, will cover the Iowa caucuses and bring you the latest tomorrow on what takes place tonight. Thomas Frank, the headline, our top headline today was not the Iowa caucuses. It was that President Obama has signed into law a $662 billion military spending bill that authorizes the government to indefinitely detain American citizens without trial. So you have this on one track, and then you have the discussion in the networks, you know, Obama's, you have Obama against this disarray of Republicans. But the real fact of what is moving, chugging along in Washington, this is your major point.
Yeah, it hasn't changed, has it? It's the same stuff, and it goes on from year to year to year. And look, I just finished writing an essay that's on a slightly different subject, but you'll see what I'm getting at. You've had, over the course of the last decade, a series of just disasters for the intellectual class in this country, for journalists, for academics. First it was the dot-com disaster, the Enron disaster, which discredited so many people. The Iraq War, remember everybody falling for Ahmed Chalabi in 2003 or 2002. Then you had, the housing bubble, everybody believing in that nonsense. Just one after another, these things destroying the credibility of the governing class in Washington and their you know, the people who write the, you know, the sort of stenographic journalistic coverage, and there is no change. There's no accountability for these people. I mean, one blunder, one screw up, one titanic mistake after another, and there is no accountability. It's positively maddening. You know, where's the change? You know.
Do you think if, say, if Mitt Romney were president, that the policies would be any different than President Obama?
Some of them would, certainly. You know, well, okay. Yes, there's a lot. I was about to say he wouldn't have passed the national health care bill, but of course he might well have done that.
Well, he was the model for it.
That's exactly right. And so that's actually a very interesting question. Would he have done anything differently? I don't think he would have ended the Iraq war as promptly as Obama.
Well, actually, he had said that the U.S. should get out of Afghanistan a while ago, not so long ago, months ago.
Romney said this?
Yes, quite an uproar. And now he's changed his position. And he said that Obama pulled out of Iraq too soon, but we've seen him change on so many different issues.
That's right, but he has very successfully in the last couple of weeks has adopted the kind of Tea Party language of, you know, ring the alarm bells, you know, tyranny is here, the socialists have taken over, that sort of thing. He's been saying that for the last couple of days. And I think, you know, you talk about the disarray in Iowa. Iowa is always a mess. It's going to sort itself out very soon. Look, the candidate is obviously going to be Mitt Romney. He's the only one he knows what he's doing. He's good at it.
Whether or not he wins Iowa.
I think he'll either come in first or second there, and he'll certainly win New Hampshire. And he's got the most money by far. I mean, look what he did, or not he, right? He didn't do it to Newt Gingrich. It was a PAC headed by a super PAC headed by people that used to be his employees, right?
And he said when told to tell them to stop, he said that would be illegal if I were to tell whoever these people are to stop.
It would be illegal
because he's not
for him
supposed to
to
communicate with the super
That's right. So, but he's got the operation in place. He's done this before. He knows what he's doing. He talks a good game. I've seen him speak several times. He's very impressive. Some of these other guys, like Rick Santorum, I mean, I don't know what's going on there, except for that they've run out of the anti-Mitt. They need somebody to be the anti-Mitt, and they've run out of candidates, and he's the last one. So
well, talk about what you see as the tremendous victory of the right, not just through the 2010 election.
Well, they shouldn't even have a chance here. You know, these people should be as discredited as Herbert Hoover and the Republican Party were in 1936. Do you remember? I mean, of course, we don't personally remember, but when they ran Alf Landon for president in 1936, and it was just this incredible blowout by the Democrats, one of their greatest victories of all time. That's the trajectory we should be on right now. The old order was just, massively discredited by what happened under George W. Bush. And it's the Democrats, it really is the Democrats' failure that they haven't driven that message home.
We're going to break for 30 seconds and come back to this discussion. Thomas Frank is our guest. His new book is called Pity the Billionaire, The Hard Time Swindle and the Unlikely Comeback of the Right. This is Democracy Now! Back in 30 seconds.